Anthea Ayache. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did. Well done.
First box ticked. Welcome to Tasty Humans, powered by What's On and here in the lovely Media One Hotel. I'm very scared, and I can tell you that.
I'm quite scared too.
And you're scared as well. I've never had a professional journalist, radio presenter, a proper media person, on here. And now I'm the one asking the questions. So
I'm not going to be judging you on your questions. I'm way more scared about being the person on the other side. I'm used to asking questions. I'm not used to answering them.
So you even said that much better than me. I feel like I've just learned to play the guitar and I'm sitting opposite Slash going, do you want to hear a tune?
I'm not quite Slash of the media world, I promise.
So let's start with, why did you want to become a journalist? Like, I do like to go back to kind of day one, and so why journalism? Why radio presenting?
So it's actually interesting. And I know earlier when we were having a brief little chat outside, I said, well, I don't think I can hark back to when I was a kid. But actually with that question, I can, because I really, really wanted to do journalism as my kind of work experience when you're at high school. And so I asked my mum, we were living in St Andrews in Scotland at the time, and I said, Mum, can you try and get me onto the Courier, which was the local newspaper? And she was like, oh, yes. I'm not quite sure how much effort she put in, but I ended up down at the local leisure centre making coffees. Wasn't quite.
Going with not much.
But it goes to show that from that age, which was when I was 13, 14, that was what I was interested in. I ended up working in radio, but more in radio presenting rather than news in Lebanon in between 2004 and 2006. Then I went back to the UK and I did get a job kind of as what's called in the UK a swing jock. So you're basically covering, and it was with the British Forces Radio.
Okay.
And that started to get me more interested in news because I was tying in families who were living in Catterick to talk to their families in Afghanistan. So I started to become interested in the news element of radio. Then moved over here. I got a job at Dubai 92 and I was a weekend presenter. And then one day they needed me to cover in the news department. And I loved it. Like, there was no looking back. I was just like, no, there's absolutely, hats off to people who can do contemporary hit radio presenting. So you've got to be funny, you've got to be engaging. And my interests lie way more in what's happening in the world in terms of, I don't know, doom and gloom perhaps, rather than being witty.
Maybe something serious.
Yeah.
Did you find that delivering something that had a lot more weight to it than just sort of listen to music and we all have a laugh in between?
Well, I definitely don't want to be putting down people. I have a lot of friends who are radio presenters and I know that they put a lot of work into it. But yeah, I mean, you're either one or the other, basically. Yeah. And I was news. Anyway, so I did, ended up being in news for quite a long time. I moved over to Gulf News, where people who've been in Dubai for a long time will remember Radio 1 and Radio 2, that were owned by GNB Radio back then. And I was a radio presenter there. And then I remember going to Jordan on holiday just for a long weekend to see a friend, and happened to meet somebody. At this time, the Arab Spring was happening. So there were a lot of refugees pouring out of Syria because of the civil war and coming into Jordan. And somebody said to me, well, do you want to go to the Zaatari refugee camp that's just opened? And I'd been talking about this on the radio, this huge camp that'd been built by the UNHCR. And I thought, well, yeah, this makes news a reality. Mm-hmm. So I said, look, I don't have a press pass. And he said, oh, you're with me. I'll get you in. And we drove 3 hours. And I was the first international journalist to be allowed in. And I think that absolutely changed my life that moment, because it wasn't just something I was reading and regurgitating. Like,
I was going to ask.
This was reality. This was people covered in clothes. I mean, with clothes covered in blood that, had had family members killed in front of them and they didn't have clean clothes to wear. Their hair was filthy. It was a real eye-opener. And I think that trip made me realize that that's what I wanted to pursue, and I wanted to get into humanitarian journalism.
How did it change you? Like I suppose just to maybe elaborate on that, which was, like you said, you're reading it off the page and then you actually go there. Like, what was that?
It's shocking,
Yeah.
eye-opening, life-changing, career course altering. I just wasn't happy anymore to get back and sit in a newsroom and just rewrite other people's work who were going to these places and writing these things. I wanted to be that person. And I was very fortunate that I wrote so when I did a live piece for the radio stations, for the radio news, somebody from the newspaper heard it and they contacted me and said, can you write a piece on this? So I wrote a small kind of news piece on it. And then the editor of Friday magazine, which was the weekly supplement inside Golf News, contacted me and said, I want 3,000 words on this. 3,000 words? I hadn't done that since university, like writing a dissertation. And I didn't think that I could do it, but I did it. And it ended up getting the cover story and 6 pages inside Friday. And cut a long story short, she ended up kind of taking me from radio, and I ended up working full-time for Friday magazine as a features writer. And from there, I travelled extensively to write about humanitarian topics.
So where else have you been?
I covered a lot over those years. Some of the main stories that I covered then were what inspired me to start the Ethicalist.
Mm-hmm.
But I went to Indonesia to write about palm oil plantations. I went to Vietnam to write about human trafficking. I went to Afghanistan I went to Afghanistan 3 times to write about women's rights predominantly. We went to Africa to write about different animal conservation stories.
If I can ask,
Yeah.
because again, we are honestly completely unscripted and no pre-approved questions. I do like to hammer this point home all the time, but it is, what was it like being in Afghanistan? Like, as a woman, how was it? Was it super intimidating, incredibly risky, or did you feel safe and looked after? Like, what was the...
Well, no, I ended up going and staying with somebody that had assured me he was completely legit on Twitter.
Okay.
So I was a bit of a risk taker.
I was going to say, yeah, I just said it on Twitter. It must be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Trustworthy. To be fair, the first time I went to stay with a lady who I was writing about, and she had created underground schools during the previous Taliban rule for girls. And so at this point, the Taliban wasn't in control. And so when I went over and I stayed with her, but the next 3 times that I went and stayed with a BBC journalist. So he was trustworthy, even though we met on Twitter. He found me because I ended up writing about the fact that I'd been in Afghanistan. So he contacted me and he was like, wow, somebody who just comes over like that, freelance, I need to know who you are. And he really helped me. And yes, it was a scary place. I'm not going to deny it. It is a scary place. But there's something that really draws you back. There's just something about it. The people are incredible. The country is magnificent. If it didn't have the problems that it has, it would be booming with tourism. I went up to write about I flew up to an area called Badakhshan where there'd been a huge landslide and all the villages were wiped out. And we were driving along it. There was no roads. I was with Afghan Aid at the time. And you're literally driving over kind of boulders and rocks, and there's local farmers walking past with like a few, goats and little children running around barefoot. The scenery is like, I don't know, something out of the glens of Scotland or the Nordics, just breathtaking. And I remember getting to this, again, there was a camp set up by the United Nations for all the displaced people from the villages who'd survived. A lot of them had lost so many members of their family. And I remember getting to a tent and a lady had agreed to be interviewed and obviously asked me to take off my shoes before I went inside the tent, of course. And I remember her offering me a cup of tea and I just thought, you've lost everything.
Yeah.
You have nothing. You're living in a tent. You've lost your family and you're giving me something. Just the people that you meet when you go to some of the most extreme situations in the world is really humbling. So, I would always love to go back to Afghanistan, but now, unfortunately, is not really the right time. But one day, I hope for the Afghan people because they're incredible people.
Do you think they'll ever sort it out? Or do you think there is an element, we're getting into a little bit of difficult territory here.
Yeah,
I'm
like...
It's more like Yeah, this is a bit tricky. But it's okay. So I grew up in the 80s. Maybe a good way to look at this is Northern Ireland and the things that went on there, that was extremely up and down for a number of years, putting it lightly. And eventually they've managed to get some sort of, I'd say, peace, and again, if so my words there are very sort of naive, but I'm kind of coming from that angle. Do you think it could ever find a way, or
I mean,
is it a long way off?
I think it's one of the most complex countries in the world.
Okay.
I don't have the answer to it. I wrote about Afghanistan many years ago now, but I did meet somebody at an airport in Amsterdam a couple of weeks ago, who just kind of sidled over and started chatting to me and said, "Guess where I'm from?" And I mean, anybody who sidles over and has that as their first question, I was like, it's going to be an interesting conversation. I said, "Oh, I don't know." He said, "Well, I'm from Afghanistan." And I said, "Oh, I love Afghanistan." And so we ended up talking. And as it turns out, his family members are part of the now government, the Taliban. And he said, "Can you come over and write about Afghanistan now as a country that is attractive to tourists?" And I said, "Well, are you going to give girls an education?" And he said, "Well, not quite yet. It's not something that we can afford." And I said, "Until you can prove to the outside world that women have the right to education, I don't think you're going to be able to sell your country as a tourism destination, because people just don't agree with the way that women are treated." And I think that's the kind of closest link that I've had to Afghanistan recently. But no, I don't think we're going to be doing a travel feature in the Ethicalist anytime soon on Kabul.
Fair enough. And I appreciate your answer, and it was probably a bit of a tricky question. So
I segued my way out of it.
Yes.
By being chatted up at the airport.
It's very professional. I've made a mental note of that. So the Ethicalist. Let's get into some safe territory.
Yeah, something I know more about.
So you've been here for 14 years, and the Ethicalist has been going for how long?
So I originally launched the Ethicalist in 2017.
Okay.
So just to quickly recap on why I decided to launch it.
100%.
I mentioned earlier that I did, I traveled a lot. But just in a nutshell, to say that, so the Afghanistan one with the landslide, for example, that was due to basically deforestation. So they're cutting down trees that are growing on these mountains, and therefore when there are floods, there are landslides. I went to Indonesia to write about palm oil plantations and the effects that's having on orangutan populations. One of the most beautiful places in the world. I mean, I loved it so much, I ended up taking my husband there on honeymoon. His idea of being woken up by monkeys thinking that, the tin roof was a trampoline was not his idea of romance, but...
It was yours.
Yeah, it was mine. And also, all these years later, if there is ever a story about a honeymoon, we don't talk about the fancy hotels and all the nice places. We talk about, the orangutans and being out in the middle of nowhere. But, what I started to realize after all of these trips, I also went to Cambodia to write about clean water shortages, and went out to these rural communities, and there were the children were drinking orange water, like their glasses had orange water in them. And to them, this was normal. We were putting in water. The charity I was with, were putting in water filters, and saying, "This is what your water's meant to look like." And they were like, well, no. And there were so many birth defects and deformities and no teeth, and, and driving back all the way to Phnom Penh was just factory after factory after factory of fashion, textiles, basically pumping out their dyes into the riverways, which were making these way down to rural communities, and they were just basically drinking toxic chemical dyes. So these stories started to combine, and I thought, well, people need to be hearing about this. And the magazine I was working at took a slightly different angle, and we needed to be more lifestyle and perhaps less newsy. So I decided to launch the Ethicalist and be a platform for change makers, sustainability, humanitarian stories, because they're all interlinked. Sadly, sustainability at this time wasn't quite as big as it is now in the UAE, and I struggled to get it off the ground. Our readership was predominantly outside of the country because we were digital, and I took the difficult decision to close it in 2018 because it wasn't financially viable. I was also trying to have children, and it was a lot of work. I was working 17-hour days, and so that was also an element of it. So I went away and had children. And then in 2022, I mean, I'd missed it the whole time. I saw the climate conversation really growing. And, things like at that point, suddenly Sky News decided to make a channel dedicated to climate news. And you just saw that people were really beginning to take it very seriously. I was thinking, if only I hadn't given up the Ethicalist. So in 2022, I decided, right, let's start this again. It seemed like the right time. There was COP28 just around the corner, 2023 being named the Year of Sustainability in the UAE. So yeah, relaunched in 2022. Nearly 2
Well,
years
it's
ago.
definitely sustainability and the climate and everything is, I don't know, I think I said to you downstairs, I remember in the 80s, the ozone layer, and suddenly if you were using certain brands of aerosols, you were causing all of this damage, and it caused this awakening of kind of mass panic where that all changed. And I think you said to me it actually worked, which is something I didn't know because I haven't been very well versed on this, which is scary talking to you. But so I suppose my question would be through the Ethicalist, which is how are you sort of attempting to change people's view on this? Because it's still very political, and it's still very, some people think it's real, some people think it's overblown.
I mean, I'd like to think that there are fewer people today that don't think it's real. I still have some very close friends who don't believe it's real, but they just don't dare broach that conversation with me. I'm like, go have it with other people. But I think what there is there's a much bigger understanding now of how large the issue is. I think, yes, you've had, we had this problem with the ozone layer, and it has successfully recovered, which is fantastic. But that was because governments galvanized. We both remember it. We suddenly weren't allowed to. Everything had to become, the deodorants, and had to change. And I mean, I don't know enough about it because I was very young. But I think if we galvanized in that same way today, and there was this slightly more sense of urgency, and I think the Ethicalist is the problem is sustainable. The narrative of sustainability needs to change. At the moment, you say sustainability, somebody goes, it's the majority. It's almost has negative connotations as a word. And the Ethicalist is trying to change that. We are not technical. We're not corporate. We're not a B2B publication. We don't do kind of profile pieces on business leaders. And there's nothing wrong with all of that. There is a place for all of that. It's just not us. The Ethicalist comes at it from a lifestyle point of view. So we think that the way to galvanize real lasting change is to get a very wide audience on board. The saying goes that you don't need 10 people doing something perfectly. You need 1,000 people doing it imperfectly, but trying, like
80% there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We're not saying, for example, be vegan, but we're saying reduce your meat consumption by once a week. I know you're laughing. We can talk about veganism in a second.
No, you're making it like I'm laughing at vegans, which I'm not. I just had some very funny vegan jokes. Sorry.
You do, and I do want to talk about them. But we think, for example, by, as a lifestyle magazine, we talk about travel, fashion, beauty, food, but all of that under the sustainability umbrella. So say somebody lands on the website to talk to because they're interested in clean beauty, just because of their skin, for example, they would then, reading an article, learn about the fact how the beauty industry affects the planet.
So I have a question. Of course I do. Right, sorry.
Good.
Yeah,
you're off to a good start.
I'm such a professional. Is out of those ones you listed, which is beauty, fashion, food, travel, etc., when you were kind of started to really turn your sights onto this and investigate these points, which ones were kind of, I'd say they're like the most shocking? You're like, wow, like was it all the same, or what?
They are all shocking. As human beings, we are mass consumers. Mm-hmm. That's a sad reality. We like to have things, whether that be in any of those areas. But I think the two areas that have shocked me the most, or the three areas, I think they're all inextricably linked, would be our mass plastic addiction. I mean, the amount of plastic that we consume, I think we generate 40 million metric tons of plastic a year. a plastic water bottle gets used every second across the globe. We use 5 trillion plastic bags a year. There is no, what people don't understand is there is no away in throwaway. There isn't. It all has to go somewhere. And unfortunately, it is a huge contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions. It's a huge contributor to the loss of marine life. It's leaching into, you put it into landfill, it leaches into soil and, poisons our waterways, which poisons our oceans. Our oceans now have, I think it's a quarter of the surface of our ocean is covered in plastic. They say that by 2048, and this isn't just a throwaway comment, by 2048, there is going to be more plastic than fish in the ocean. When you start to do this research, it's terrifying.
Well, plastic was the one that got to me.
Yeah.
Which I can be very open that I've never paid much attention to it. It just wasn't ever part of my lifestyle, my circle of research or anything. And then it was when all this came around and the whole plastic thing was really being exposed. And I started to notice how much plastic is around us and then how much was in the sea. And when you saw these images of it all being washed up on shores where and I was like, and I did actively start using less and less of it. Plastic water bottles, I still have them everywhere, but obviously not in Media One, as you can tell.
Yeah.
But at home, but the thing is I've got a friend who lives in America and we were talking about this and he was making these comments that they always knew that it was damaging, they being the original creators of plastic, but just due to packaging, consumerism, commercialism, they didn't care. You know what I mean? So being somebody hugely knowledgeable on this, like, how much do you think has been discovered along the way and how much was discarded at the beginning, maybe, as we know this might be damaging, but hey, we'll make enough money off of it?
Well, I think that's typical human greed. Just, bury our heads in the sand and we'll deal with the consequences later. Probably not going to happen in my lifetime, so it doesn't really matter, does it? I wouldn't say I'm hugely knowledgeable on what the plastic manufacturing industry has thought in the long term about the impacts of the planet. What I do know, interestingly, and I learned this quite recently, do you know why plastic was first invented? It's such a cool story. So it was invented in the 1800s. By a billiard playing, so he wasn't him that invented it, but he loved playing billiards, and billiard balls were made out of elephant ivory. And obviously you had to kill 2 elephants for 1 set of billiard balls, which is obviously completely unsustainable. So elephants were running out, ivory was running out, and so he put a competition up with a big award for somebody who could create a synthetic alternative to ivory. And that was when the first plastic was created. So they created the billiard balls. Ironically, now, elephants are eating plastics and choking on it. But, it's ironic that it was originally created as a way of, I don't think saving elephants was necessarily. Yes, exactly.
Helping, assisting.
But, it's, basically our plastic consumption, as it started really in, kind of the post-war era, 1960s, 1970s, plastic is fantastic. Your home is a happy place with, if it's a plastic place. But then it just kind of really, took off after that. And our plastic consumption is just through the roof and it's projected to continue.
So
growing.
It's not, with all the measures that people are taking, it's not declining, even if it's slowly.
Oh no, it's definitely not declining. It's I don't know the exact statistics, but I think it's projected to double by 2040 or 2050, our plastic consumption. It's not all doom and gloom, though. There are so many amazing organizations that are creating alternatives. The problem is cost, viability and demand. If you don't have enough companies requesting it, then the cost of replacing, I don't know, your plastic container with a container made out of mushrooms, there's going to be a huge price discrepancy. So as you were saying about, do you think they just cared about money? Ultimately, money is a big contributing factor.
For something that appears to be so urgent, Why do you think, or why would governments not be subsidizing the growth in this area?
I mean, I would hope that they are. Again, we're getting into a slightly more, we don't tend to look into that area because we're lifestyle. So that starts going into kind of corporate ESG area that we leave to the experts. But I would imagine that it is being supported. And there are a lot of different initiatives. I mean, I was writing an article just the other day on the state of our seas and whether seafood can ever be sustainable. And it was really encouraging to see the amount of incredible, well-funded, well-supported startups that are out there that are trying to improve the fishing industry as a whole, tracking illegal fishing, for example, or, trying to implement marine preservation zones, MAPs. There is a lot happening. I don't think that everybody's just being left to fend for themselves.
Oh no, I didn't.
But I do believe that as individuals, which is what the Ethicalist is all about, kind of empowering individuals to make a change, because collectively we can have a huge impact. I think as individuals, when it comes to plastic consumption, which is what we've predominantly been talking about, there's so much we can do. It's little things like taking your reusable bags to the supermarket. I know that they say that these little plastic bags for vegetables and fruits are biodegradable, but really it's better not to use them at all. And take those little net bags that you can get for sale in the supermarkets. Things like getting a water filter system at home. I've had a water filter since 2017. I haven't needed to buy plastic water bottles. The fact that we consume so many of them, I don't even want to think about it. So trying to use zero waste products in the bathroom. I mean, I started using shampoo bars. I was a bit like, they're a bit hippie. And then started using them, and they're absolutely brilliant. You can get things like tooth tabs instead of toothpaste, things that are tubes that are unrecyclable, or they're improving. But, there are things that we can all be doing to reduce our plastic consumption. But then that goes into a whole other area of things that we can be doing as well, such as reducing our meat consumption.
100%. But not too much.
Over to you.
Over to you. No, I don't have. The vegan thing is just like I said, I'm in the restaurant business, and so a lot of the restaurants I've worked in and been a part of have been incredibly carnivore driven. So we've always had running jokes about what have you got? Someone phones up and says, "What do you do? What can I get you for a vegan?" And I'm like, "A taxi," stuff like this, which I've never said to anybody. It's just banter, what I mean. Having said that, I did do a tasting here in Garden on 8, which is a very carnivorous venue. They're putting a vegan dish on the menu, and the chef comes out with a vegan curry. And I was like, I actually said the words, "I think they've got a point," And I then backed up with a statement, which is true, which is where I said, "I think I could eat this every day," which is what I actually say if I'm going to hugely compliment a dish.
Okay.
So I was incredibly pleasantly surprised. And I did go to a big vegan dinner once a couple of years ago where everything was vegan. And I was very much surprised about that as well. I sound terrible tonight.
No.
I'm going to get panned by the vegans.
You know what? You sound like the majority of people.
Yeah.
Veganism is a very small percentage of the population. It's growing, but it's still very small. Vegetarianism is obviously a lot bigger. But no, listening to you is not, you do hear this kind of banter around veganism, and sadly veganism, although it's improving, veganism almost in the way that sustainability has negative connotations to it, because in the past there has been a lot of extremism associated with veganism. However, I mean, we promote veganism and vegetarianism on the Ethicalist a lot, and the reason for that is that animal-based agriculture is hugely negatively impacting the planet. Things like 60% of deforestation globally happens for the livestock industry to make way for not only the livestock itself, but for the livestock feed like soy. I think a vegan has, if you turn to a veganism diet full stop, you reduce your carbon footprint by 73%. So imagine how big an impact the livestock industry is having on the planet. I mean, it's responsible for over 14% of global greenhouse gas emissions. If you think that, I mean, so I'm throwing loads of statistics at you, but if you think that one burger uses up the equivalent of 300 laundry washers to make one burger.
I read a similar stat to this, yeah.
Yeah.
Where I was...
It requires an enormous amount of water to make a steak or to make a burger. So, you know, I think, in fact, I met somebody in Sweden recently who has worked on a business called Consupedia, which is all about giving access to consumers about choices that they're making. And they were going to a sustainability event on an island in Sweden. And some people chose to fly and some people chose to take the boat. And people who chose to take the boat were predominantly doing so because they wanted to reduce their carbon footprint or their travel footprint. And his team did the maths that if they had got on the boat and they'd had a sandwich with meat in it or a burger and then a coffee with some milk in it, their carbon footprint was bigger than if they'd flown by plane.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, you know, you have somebody, for example, who's like, oh, well, you know, I do my washing on 20 degrees and I try to, you know, never use anything other than, you know, the washing machine being full. But then you're going and having meat 3 times a day. Don't bother. You might as well just have your washing machine on nonstop. And we're not saying to people, stop eating meat at all. That's not what we're saying. Like that's not a reality. It's not realistic. But I think if we reduce our meat consumption, if everybody had one plant-based day a week, the positive effects would be enormous. And there is amazing plant-based food. I mean, I cook a lot of Lebanese food at home, a lot of which is plant-based. Some of the recipes would traditionally have meat in them, but you remove the meat and they're just as fantastic. It's not. It isn't hard.
It's not. Yeah, it's. I've eaten a lot of vegan dishes and a lot of plant-based dishes recently, and I think one thing I was wanted to touch upon when you actually said about, you mentioned sustainability and people like this. There is this massive preconception that it's all boring, which it isn't. Like my vegan friend, her name's Lulu, and she won't mind me saying this. She's covered in tattoos. Uses just the same sort of language as I do when I'm not on a podcast. And this was the lady who I went and had this dinner party with. And it was this kind of thing where you think that it's not about cool and uncool. Like you say, it is lifestyle. And so through the
Ethicalist.
Sorry, the Ethicalist. How bad is that? So you're trying to make it sort of more attractive. And what are the main steps you're taking in order to do that? Like how it's being presented, sort of the strategy behind it.
Strategy?
Yeah. Okay.
No, I'm joking. I think the way that we're trying to do that is by being, you know, we're an open, honest ally. We're not extreme. We provide people with the information for them to make their own choices. We do that in a way that is attractive. I mean, if you pick up a copy of the magazine that's available in Spinneys and Waitrose.
No problem. That's shameless plugging is absolutely fine. You know what I mean?
We're also on the ethicalist.com. If you pick up a copy of the magazine, you know, you'll see it's a beautiful magazine with a beautiful woman on the front cover.
It is.
Really fabulous features on the inside. We use really powerful imagery. All of these are ways of getting people more interested in reading something. You know, we've had many comments in the past about the beautiful imagery that we use digitally and in print, that it's a very attractive magazine. But the content is completely different to what a standard magazine is. I mean, we're printed, for example, on wood-free paper, which basically it doesn't mean that it's not made out of wood. It means that it's not linked to deforestation. So, for example, a lot of the timber industry for paper comes from Indonesia. And as I was mentioning earlier about Indonesia and orangutans, there are so many endangered animals because so much of the land and the forests have been cleared to make way for timber, palm oil, etc. So, in fact, I found a local printers here. And I ordered the wood-free paper from Europe. Anyway, a week before I called in and I said, just checking that we're ready to go next week. And he was like, oh, we don't have the European wood-free paper left. I said, what do you have left? He was like, it's fine. It's from Indonesia. was like, no, I'm not printing the Ethicalist on paper from Indonesia. And I said, one of the opening articles is about orangutans becoming extinct in Indonesia. And he was like, no, but it's a green certified paper producing mill. So I phoned my editor and I said, we need to do some journalism now. We didn't have time. We quickly looked into it. And as soon as you scratched away on the surface, Greenpeace was no longer working with this organization. WWF was no longer working with them. They'd all pulled out because of greenwashing.
I was about to ask about greenwashing. Yeah, sorry, go on.
So they'd all pulled out because of greenwashing. And I was like, no, we are going to print on this day. You need to find me a European paper. So
for people hopefully watching, you know what I mean? Greenwashing.
Yeah.
So what's your interpretation of green? Like, what is it? So we were doing let's start again. We use this company called Here Ago.
Yeah.
Who do the wonky veg. Mm-hmm. And we did this really good sort of activation in one of our restaurants. So we did like a wonky veg cook-off where we took some chefs and we got some sustainable champions in and a bit of media and stuff like that because we wanted to launch this sustainable dish. And we had a journalist come and watch. He was very vocal, very loud, came across in the beginning as quite rude. When people were giving their speeches, he was shouting things out. And I looked at it more like a disruptive client. So I went into manager mode and I walked over and I sort of, used to run nightclubs. So dealing with...
Get out.
I didn't go. I thought it might go there. Do you know what I mean? No, yeah. But I then sat down with him and I was like, why are you being so... I can't remember his name. He started to explain that he came here to make sure we're not greenwashing. I'd never heard of the term before. And he said that he is a journalist who wants to expose greenwashing. And when he told me about it, I was I was shocked and also on maybe a human scale, a bit like typical, that people will use it as a way to do, let's say...
So everybody's at it.
Positive PR. Where they're not actually doing it. So
I can't give concrete examples off the top of my head, but it's happening a lot. Basically, being sustainable, being eco-friendly is something that the general public wants. In the travel industry, in particular, that's, travelers are now looking for conservation vacations or conscious travel. Booking.com now has the kind of ticks for sustainability next to properties. It's something that the public wants, and therefore companies want to be seen to be doing it. But as the example that I've just given you with this paper mill in Indonesia, you go onto the website and it would have looked like they were a conservation area. It was all green and pictures of orangutans and monkeys and different animals that they're saving and all the different charitable things that they're doing. And then you scratch away at the surface and actually, they're still razing down loads of forest. So it is a question of basically what is greenwashing, as you said. Greenwashing is basically when a company pretends to be doing something to save the environment and they're not. And so, for example, there are things like clothing brands. The textile industry is horrific. We create 100 billion pieces of clothing a year, most of which are made to last 10 wears maximum. A lot of them even get one wear. I can't think of how terribly they must be made. But anyway, so there's things like, we're still going to have factories pumping out chemical dyes into waterways, and we're still going to have really unfair wages and labour practices and use children. And we're still going to be using 90% plastic in our clothing that's then going to end up in landfill. But you can come to our shops and recycle your old clothes. Okay, so that's going to make a difference.
And the fashion industry is an industry where every year it has to change. Every season there's new clothes.
And now there are so many seasons. There's something, I don't know, I'm not a fashion expert, but I think there's more than 10 seasons in a year now when there used to only be...
Really?
Yeah, there only used to be there's so many that literally just...
Summer collection, autumn, winter, spring.
Yeah. Whereas now they're kind of changing styles. I don't think you've got the big kind of... We're not talking about the high end, the Dior's and the Chanel's and the Dolce & Gabbanas. I think we're talking more, the kind of Shein and H&M and Zara changing their styles and their seasons really, really quickly. The big fast fashion behemoths, basically. Behemoths, never remember. But yeah, ultimately, it...
but it's an industry that's causing a lot of impact in this particular area. was going to say another word there, so I'm glad I didn't. But they're causing a lot of impact in this area. And then it's, like I say, it's an industry that changes so frequently. It's saying buy this and 2 months later, now you need to throw it away.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is
tragic.
Yes,
it's absolutely tragic.
It's a cycle that's, I mean, I'm a typical man who will buy a T-shirt. I've still got clothes from 15 years ago.
Yeah, me too.
I actually have, yeah. And the thing is that I'm just one of those people that's not fashion driven at all. People that know me, they know this. I'm not fashion conscious. I can't wear labels and people's
No, but you've got your own
T-shirts.
You've got your own unique style.
Yeah, I just...
I think your tattoos do your style
under my skin for it instead. But yeah, for people that are really into this, which is a lot of people, having to buy it, get it, throw it away because I need the new one.
I mean it's tragic, and I think Livia Firth is one of my eco heroes. She runs an organisation in the UK called EcoAge, which really sadly just closed. But she was married to Colin Firth, and she's a huge advocate for sustainable fashion. She's one of the world's biggest eco warriors, and she coined the expression 30 wears, or basically that it needs to be, if you're going to buy an item, make sure you can wear it 30 times. And if you can't wear it 30 times, don't buy it. But people, I mean, I would always wear an item 30 times.
Well, I was going to say,
or even more than that.
Yeah.
I just don't throw clothes away. I don't buy that many, and I don't understand that culture of buy, throw, which is why the Ethicalist did the conscious clothes swap party that we did at Coco Lounge.
Which was very good.
A few months ago.
Yeah.
It really was. And the whole idea, and I loved it because it was so Dubai, because I put up a rail for the slightly cheaper end, or the cheaper end of clothing market, then mid-range, and then luxury. And I honestly thought that, the low end would be jam-packed full, the rails, and that the luxury end would kind of have a few dwindling pieces on it. Oh no, this is Dubai. Luxury Valentino handbags, belts with $300 labels still on them. There was so many beautiful brands, which I really wasn't expecting, but it was fantastic. And so many people that came were like, oh my gosh, this is so refreshing to see this in the UAE. This is what the UAE needs.
Yeah.
We don't have access to this kind of clothes swapping. It's growing, thankfully. I've noticed a few other clothes swapping events happening, which is great, because I'm sure there's quite a few wardrobes with quite a lot of unworn clothes in the UAE.
And there's a few people.
And you go and swap them, and suddenly you've got something brand new in your wardrobe, and for something I loved it when there was a lady trying on a ball dress that I hadn't worn for years, and she didn't know it was mine, and she was like, oh my gosh, this is beautiful, this is perfect, I love it, I've got to take this. And I was like, so nice, because it was something that I didn't like anymore,
So where are the other areas that people can make instant improvements? Because I think this is another thing that I think really needs to be raised, especially for people like myself, which is what could you do straight away that was not going to impact your lifestyle at all, you just weren't aware, that can help shift the dial? What would be the biggest piece of advice? I mean,
stop eating meat.
Yeah.
I mean, I think going back to that, it is the biggest step we as individuals can take to make a positive impact, is to reduce our meat consumption easily. It is a huge contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions. So definitely reducing our meat consumption. Mm-hmm. I think things at home like composting, and putting in a water filter. You're composting, then you're reducing food waste. The UAE has got one of the highest per capita food waste ratios in the world. I think 38% of our food gets thrown in the bin, and that goes up to 60% during Ramadan. I think food waste is a huge issue over here. And if you can invest in a composter, I know that it is, it can cost over 1,000 dirhams for a composter. That's unattainable for a lot of people. But if you can afford it, do it. It reduces all of that food going to landfill and sitting there and pumping out methane gases. It's a fertilizer for your garden if you have a garden, or it's a fertilizer for your plants. So that's another one. And then the water filter. I think those are 3 easy steps that that we could all be doing that dramatically impact plastic use, wastage of food, and the impact, the global impact of the meat industry.
No, definitely. I think the water thing is super interesting because here it is in the UK, you can drink the tap water.
Yeah.
I mean, I was raised on it, you know.
Yeah.
And then
Look at you.
Yeah. Yes. I'm still alive.
Yay.
There you go. There you go. There's a minimum requirement that's been achieved.
But yes, you're right. You can drink the tap water in England, and you can also compost because it comes and gets collected and has done for many years. Your scraps bin in the UK.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So, where are you hoping to take this now? You know, what's the next 5 years looking like in your mind for the Ethicalist?
Surviving? No. I think a strategy. It would. We're very lucky in that we have a global reach because we have a digital platform and we have the print edition. At the moment, the print edition is a UAE-based publication. We only print here and we only distribute here. Although we are in airports, so we, in fact, Tom Urquhart from Dubai Eye bumped into Tom at an event recently, and he went, "Anthea," he said, "I went to Sri Lanka on holiday recently, and the Ethicalist was the coffee table book." And I said, "Oh, and you didn't think to share that on social media?"
You must have been happy with that.
Of course, absolutely. I was delighted that not only had it been, taken on an aeroplane and then not left on the aeroplane, actually been put into somebody's bag and kept in their bag, but then they've gone on holiday, they've read it, and they've left it, and the owner of the villa has thought, "Oh, that's pretty, let's leave that as a coffee table book," which is exactly what the Ethicalist is meant to be. But so going back to what your question about, where do we hope to be in 5 years? Digitally, we have a presence. Obviously, our number one audience is in the UAE. A lot of our content is geared for the UAE, but we also have a strong audience in the UK and in the US. So the ultimate aim would be to create the UK version and a US version of the Ethicalist. I think we're doing something that at the moment nobody else is doing, which is sustainable lifestyle. So it's kind of a mix of a kind of fashion and beauty magazine, but that deals with, some quite hard-hitting conservation and humanitarian topics. And that mix hasn't really been done before.
No. People are either one or the other to try and put them together is...
Yeah, but our fashion, for example, in the last edition, you'll see that we've got a 6-page fashion shoot and all of those clothes are rentable. We're not putting, go and spend 5,000 dirhams on this beautiful dress. We're like, go down to this secondhand store and you can rent it for 3 days for 150 dirhams.
Because I think, to circle back to it, I think it's the biggest thing. It's the lack of knowledge that the general consumer has about the way you can just live a very, very good lifestyle by following this.
Well, the whole point is that you don't need to overhaul your lifestyle to live more sustainably. You can still go to beautiful locations on holiday. I was very recently very fortunate enough to go to the Maldives and stayed at the Ritz-Carlton. I mean, it's absolute stunning hotel. And they've got so much marine conservation going on. In fact, so many of their activities on the activity morning list were to do with saving the corals, getting discarded fishing nets out of the ocean, doing beach cleanups, which goes to show that there is a demand from travellers and consumers that's what they want to do. And that ties back to why we really want to work with you guys. We love that Media One are leading the way.
Thank you.
With your sustainability in the UAE. You're a boutique, super cool hotel, but you're implementing loads of strategies. I mean, you've got the Green Key certification, one of only 3%.
3%,
900 hotels in the UAE, which is fantastic.
Thank you.
Quite a lot that you're doing with the zero waste in the kitchens, teaming up with the Waste Lab.
Well, I've been here for 1 year, 3 months, and my knowledge of this particular topic has grown 1,000%. In all the things that Media One does, all the things we're involved in, it's woven into every single conversation that we're having, which I think is very, very important. And like I say, has really changed my view on it. My knowledge has grown on it. And like I say, to get the Green Key certification, there's a lot of people here that have worked very hard for that. So, and I feel very proud of it. It's
an achievement. There are a lot of hotels in the UAE, and you're amongst a handful to actually be, to fulfill all the credentials for it. So, well done.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You.
And you've got other things like as soon as you arrive, you've got the EV charging stations, and then as soon as you walk into the hotel, you're informing customers on that big board at the front that's constantly got different eco messages coming out. So, for example, today it was that you have the water the water refill station where you can get still all sparkling.
Yeah,
I thought it was very fancy.
Yep, no plastic bottles in any of the venues.
Yeah.
In any of the hotel rooms, any of the meeting rooms. There's...
Yeah, you even got a green living wall in one of your event spaces, I noticed last time I was here.
You did.
I was very impressed. Love a living wall.
And I was very educated on the fact that, God,
I thought it was plastic.
I'm going to admit that. I was like, I just thought that was plastic, And I've been there for 6 months.
No, it's moss. Yeah, it's a living wall. It's really, really cool.
Well, look, we've also got a number of events coming up between us. I'm very much looking forward to Halloween, which I think will be very, very interesting.
Yeah, I'm not giving too much of that away.
No, I'm not going to.
Good. So I can't wait. That will be exciting.
Yeah. But so, look, I've had a very interesting conversation with you here. I'm still so nervous. Oh, I have no idea. When we're about to finish, when we finish, I'll tell you exactly how. Nervous. I couldn't even pronounce the name of the magazine. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, you did mess that up twice, but it's okay. I will forgive you. The Ethicalist. The more you guys work with us, the more fluid it will become. You're not the first.
Slightly on edge about sitting with someone like yourself.
This seasoned journalist that I am.
You are, come on. But what I will say, and I say to everyone, just sort of before end, is there one lasting thing you'd like to leave sort of on the table as a particular message in your field?
I think my messaging has been pretty clear the whole way through. I don't want to bore people by regurgitating the same information, but I think it's just becoming more conscious about the choices that individuals make. We as individuals are really, really powerful. I think one of the most damaging things we can do is think it's somebody else's problem. It's not somebody else's problem. It is our problem. If we want to leave a legacy for our children and our children's children, we need to act now, not when it's too late. We need to turn off the tap on our plastic consumption, and we as individuals have the capacity to do that. We have the capacity to make choices that will really make a difference, and I think people need to stop putting their head in the sands. Yes, it's frightening, but it's also hopeful. It can be scary to think about like how huge the topic is and for people to get eco-anxious. But don't ignore it. Make small changes. And collectively, we can all create a better future for all of us and for, future generations.
And it's not boring.
No.
It's not, but
See?
It's not.
That's because, it isn't boring. It's crucial. It's crucial, and there are so many people doing so many cool things, and it's really inspiring to see the amount of change makers. We have change makers here in the UAE. I was telling you about the Arctic Challenge that's happening at the moment.
Yes,
with Toby Gregory, his team,
which I'm going to really try to get him to come on and talk about.
Oh, he will. He's such a lovely, cool guy. He really will. Yeah, there's 25 days Arctic expedition that they're doing right now. They're rowing to the Arctic through freezing
That'll be my
temperatures and storms.
Why? What's wrong with you?
To raise awareness of plastic pollution. That's the reason they're doing it.
Oh, you know what I mean. Like, it's crazy.
It was just amazing.
To row to the Arctic, I mean.
I know.
Exactly.
He just rowed the Atlantic. He did 42 days and had some incredible stories to share. You should get him on here. He's a really, really interesting guy.
Well, look, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure, and I'm not scared at all now. Now I'm like, no, let's talk some more.
Well, look, we'll get you to come back on. I mean, the good thing about this is that everyone's always evolving. Everyone that comes on, the gentleman I recently did one with, we agreed that would be part one, and we'll definitely get him back on for part two because there was so much uncovered stuff. So, yeah, definitely. We'll get you to come back and we'll talk some more.
We'll come back after Halloween.
Yeah. Anthea, thank you so much.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much, Sam.